Greg?
It's going great, Riley. Great to talk to you.
Good. Yeah, no, good to talk to one of the faces that makes Catalyst happen. So you're sitting there with a really interesting looking instrument. Can you tell us what that's called?
Yeah, so this is my main axe. This is the Chapman stick, and it's a string instrument related to the electric guitar, and you play it just by tapping on the strings. I don't have it plugged in. I just kind of have it
Hmm.
hanging out as a prop. But basically, you can use it. You can play it the way a keyboard player would play. So each hand plays its own part. So go online, look at stick.com. You can see all kinds of stick players, and I have a lot of videos on my own website too, of course. But it's a lot of fun to play. Very expressive, intimate instrument. Gets into the world of electric music, like electric bass and electric guitar, but also has some affinity with the acoustic music world. It has more of an acoustic kind of a sound, maybe, than electric guitar does too. So
Yeah, no, it sounds incredible. I like the aspect of it allowing for more musical expression. I think that's really important. Do you actually want to talk a little bit about that? Like, tell us about your musical journey. Like, how did you get into playing music? What drew you to the
yeah,
Chapman stick in particular? Tell
well,
us about that.
the main thing for me is that I've always been an improvising musician, even when I was a kid. And so I've always gravitated to instruments that made that easy and fun. Keyboard, piano being kind of the main one. Yeah, but I always played band instruments like saxophone and clarinet as well. And started doing experimental recorded music when I was around 14 or 15. And kept that up while at the same time learning a lot of kind of progressive rock in different bands. And then when I got to college, I found out about the stick and I thought, well, this is a really interesting instrument. So I found a used one in the basement of a music store up in near Washington, D.C. and didn't quite have enough money to buy it. So I got my first credit card and began my lifelong relationships with both the Chapman stick and consumer credit debt. So it
Good
was
age to start.
a kismetic experience. And but the stick is it's an amazing instrument. It's not very well known. I mean, people know about it, but they don't know that much about it. And it really, because your fingers are right on the strings, you're very much more intimately connected to how the sound happens than you are with a piano. So I had listened to people like Oscar Peterson, great jazz pianist, um, Keith Jarrett also, but also was a big fan of guitarists like Ralph Towner and John Abercrombie and Terje Reepdahl, people who were getting into more unconventional ways of playing the guitar. And of course, was a big King Crimson fan, and that's where first saw Tony Levin playing the stick. And he used it. People think he was just using it as a bass player because there was so much else going on, but he played the whole instrument. He was playing all of it, and very much an inspirational musician on many levels, and a super nice cat. I really love Tony. He's a great human being and a great ambassador for the music. But there are so many players, and they all do their own thing. It's very there's really nobody who plays like anybody else. So I think it's one of those instruments that helps you find your unique way in music, perhaps more thoroughly because it's such a tabula rasa to begin with. There's no real orthodoxy or this is how you're supposed to play the stick. We all
Mhm.
come to it as adventurers.
That's interesting. I think that's really important too, the uniqueness of it. So maybe do you want to talk a little bit about unique to you? What do you do to be in peak physical condition to play this instrument? Are there any types of do you have to do like yoga? Do you do any type of physical uh wellness
You know,
routine
it's
to
a
stay in
funny,
shape to play the instrument?
it's a very funny thing because this instrument is ergonomically a fantastic instrument. Like when you play it, your hands are right up, on your body, right up here at your torso, and your wrists can be very open. So it doesn't have to be like a guitar, where you've got this going on, or violin where you got to hold down your instrument with your chin, things like that. It's very relaxed in that way. So the main thing that I do is to really guard my fingers to keep them from getting damaged. So I do a lot of gardening. I always wear gloves. I take care of a lot of animals. We have a lot of, we have horses and goats and, so I'm always very careful about my hands in those situations. There was a period of time where I was really practicing super intensely and kind of hunching my shoulders and ended up with some issues with my left shoulder. But I took a few Alexander technique sessions and was able to effectively deal with those issues and never had a recurrence. So, I mean, I would say much more risky for a stick player is carrying your amps around, lugging those heavy speaker cabinets. That's a much more dangerous activity than actually playing the instrument itself. But I mentioned gardening, and I think that gardening is because it's such a very centering activity. I think that anything that I can do that's emotionally very centering is going to be the main thing that I'm going to do to keep myself in that kind of peak condition as far as playing is concerned. So yeah, it's physically not a damaging instrument to play. In fact, I only have one callus from playing it, and that's I have my thumb from rubbing my hand
Mhm.
along the back of the instrument there for 35 years. So very easy on the fingertips because you don't have to press really hard because there's not very much tension. So it's a lot nicer on your hands than the guitar is, for example.
Yeah, no, that's great to hear that it's both helps you physically and mentally. It inspired you to do all of these other activities to keep you centered, as you said. I want to ask specifically though, because I know I'm unfamiliar with the term. When you said you had the shoulder injury, you used Alexander
Alexander technique is
techniques.
it's basically a body awareness technique that was developed by a man named F.M. Alexander, who was an actor in Australia. And he found that in order to help himself project his voice better, he had to compensate for some pretty severe posture issues that he had. So he studied children and the way that they move, and then he looked at how different they were from adults and realized that adults carry a lot of psychic weight in their bodies, and it influences how they function, how they move. And so he developed this whole way of basically being aware of your own stresses and balance issues and things. And so there was a school here in Charlottesville for many years where the technique was taught. It's very popular with musicians. I'm surprised actually that you haven't heard of it. Um, but it's definitely something that I would love to see incorporated into the Catalyst modality because it really is very effective, and it's effective in a way that it's about training yourself to take care of yourself. There's that old joke about how many chiropractors does it take to change a light bulb? You say, well, only one, but it takes 9 visits. You know, Alexander
Yeah.
technique is not like that. It's much more about being able to inform your own awareness of your body and how to make it work better, keep it in balance. So I teach the stick a lot, and a lot of my students are older students. People coming to the instrument for the first time in their 40s, 50s, and so they have a lot, oftentimes, of physical issues that need to be dealt with. In order for them to take advantage of the ergonomic soundness of the way the instrument is designed. Um, so in that sense, I work a lot with students to deal with how their own bodies could be improved in terms of just their own awareness of their own bodies and what it is they're doing in order to be able to play better. I'll give you an example. When you play the stick, typically like a guitarist, you'll put your fingers more or less parallel to the frets, and you can see how that basically causes your wrist to be bent. But when I teach people to follow the shapes of the things that they're doing with their hands so that their arm is going to move to keep their wrist open. And that's something that's very, very helpful. Whereas if you're coming to the instrument from a guitar perspective, you're not going to automatically know that. So I focus a lot on ergonomics in my own instruction about how to play the stick.
Yeah, wow, that's all very incredible. It sounds like you're very well spoken. You have how long have you been playing the Chapman stick again? How much time have you had to
I
learn all
started
of
when I
this?
was 20 in 1985, and so that's 36 years now. So
When did your journey into sort of the side involving like health and well-being? When did that start to come into the equation?
I would say really in the late '80s. That's when I first got into Alexander Technique, and when I mean I've been a healthy eater since '86, and so that's also a part of how I deal with my own body. Um, I'm I haven't eaten red meat or poultry since I was 21, I guess. So that's a long time, but it's just a health choice. I'm not a dogmatist about things like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, so for me, it was a question of recognizing that I had an issue and dealing with that issue. And I would say it didn't stop me from smoking. It didn't stop me from drinking. It didn't stop me from driving late at night while I was almost passing out, exhausted at the wheel after gigs. So there are a lot of dangers associated with being a musician that have nothing to do with playing the instrument that you play. You have to be aware of all these things. Just moving equipment around. If you're an electric musician, carrying heavy things around, you got to be careful about how you do that. Um, so there's all these different layers of health that have to do with being a musician, not just the actual practice of the instrument itself.
Yeah, no, that's really good advice. I'd say for musicians of all different crafts and practices. Definitely. Um, I want to ask too, have you ever been to any sort of wellness retreat geared towards musicians, similar to what Catalyst plans to offer?
Well, not specifically. I've done a couple of workshops in venues that were oriented towards that kind of thing. Not that dealt with things like massage therapy or yoga, but that were just like alternative culture kind of environments. Like there was a place in Salt Spring Island in British Columbia that was it was a straw bale constructed building that was beautiful, just amazing. It sounded incredible. It was very warm. It was like being in a big cocoon in a way. And the people who ran it, had this incredibly healthy food that they prepared for all the people who came there and used their place. It was like a health food oriented bed and breakfast kind of place, but that was big enough to have workshops. And I teach stick workshops all over the world and love these ones that are very kind of retreat oriented, where we get out in nature, get out in a natural setting, get away from the stresses of our daily lives. And the great thing about these events out in British Columbia on the islands out there is that in order to get there, you have to fly or drive whatever to British Columbia, but then you get on these ferries that take you from one island to the next. And each step of the way, you get this decompression process, which allows you to kind of leave behind the stressful life that you've been dealing with and really focus on making music in a way that's, I think, very cathartic for the people involved. Because when you're in your own element working on music and you're dealing with your own daily life all the time, all of those things you carry them with you into the practice room. It's very hard to leave them behind. And so I think one of the things that I value the most about the concept with Catalyst is that it will provide a place that people can do just that. They can go and leave behind the weight of their non-musical life to really dig into their musical life.
Very well said, and I agree. I hope people can get that out of the program too. When people come to Catalyst, do you think they can expect to have a workshop with you?
Oh, absolutely. Just because I play a funky instrument doesn't mean that people can only learn about that with me. I teach other aspects of music, and my favorite aspect of music to teach is improvisation. I made, I think, 8 albums of improvised music over the years and done a lot of free improvisational performance. And I think that especially musicians who come from classical background are very shy about improvising often because it's not something that's taught. They're taught to play the music on the page as well as they possibly can, and to pour their soul into the expression that music demands. but that is only one part of making music. And I think that is improvised musicians have a way of tapping into something inside of themselves that's really very different. And it doesn't mean that you couldn't or shouldn't be a good technician on your instrument. That's often very helpful, but it's not the most important thing. And I think people need to have sometimes pathways into learning how to improvise because it's not something that they have had any instruction in. They think, well, it's improvisation, so I'll just make it up. But there's all kinds of ways that you can study improvising as well. And so I really would really love to be teaching that because I think it's, again, very cathartic and healthy way of making music because it's not about um, preparing something and presenting it as perfectly as you possibly can. It's about finding something inside yourself that's completely new and it's never been done before.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I know I personally would love to take a workshop like that with you. I want to ask, when you are improvising, where do you usually draw your inspiration from? And let's just get into it. Where do you think other people can find inspiration when they're making music off the cuff like that?
Well, I think that the most powerful tool we have as improvising musicians is our voice. So oftentimes I'll use my voice as a guide to get my hands to do certain things. But mainly when I'm improvising, I'm trying to build a spontaneous compositions. So it's not usually this kind of free form thing. I really try to be aware of what I've done, what I'm doing, and then decide to do what I'm going to do next, as opposed to just having it happen in a way. So the process of improvisation is a conscious one. It's not simply random scattershot, approach. I mean, some people do that and are brilliant at it and amazing at it. And for me, I find it more satisfying to try to build music through improvisation as opposed to wandering through music in improvisation. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it totally does. It's very inspiring. So yeah, I've got one last question for you that I think will be pretty fun. So, if you could pick any musician to collaborate with, who would it be?
Gosh, pick any musician to collaborate with. Who would it be? Um, Man, that is a great question. It would have to be a drummer because the stick and the drums together is just this amazing synergy of you know, pitch and rhythm. I mean, as a stick player, you can create very complex harmonic development on the fly, melodic ideas, and they're very fully realized. And so if you're playing with musicians who play pitched instruments, oftentimes it's very hard to make those sudden leaps harmonically. Whereas if you're playing with a drummer, then it's amazing. So if I could play with someone like Bill Bruford or Jack DeJohnette or Omar Hakim, I mean, these are all people that I would just would die to play with. It would be amazing. Bob Moses, another great drummer, I would love to play with. Um, and I've had a chance to play with some really amazing musicians. They're just not as famous as these guys. So, when I think about who I like to play with, I mean, playing with Carter Beauford, the drummer from the Dave Matthews Band, he's just an unbelievable drummer, incredibly fun and easy to play with. And I've played with him in a couple of different contexts, and it was just, you know, fabulous. So. And I had a band of musicians from Holland, and the drummer in that band, Jan Wolfkamp, brilliant, amazing musician. But he lives in Holland. I live here, and it's hard to make connections, especially over recent times. Um, and then there are people who play other instruments like wind instruments that would also be really amazing to collaborate with, or string instruments. I guess. I guess that's a question I can't answer definitively. I'm sorry. I wish I could.
Sorry, don't let it restrict you. The goal should be to play with everyone. So,
Sure.
yep. Let me leave it on this one last thought. If you could give the younger musician you any piece of advice, what would that be? Give him a little sneak peek of where the Chapman stick took you in life.
Oh man. Well, I would say don't rest on the novelty of what you have. So stick players have uh, a great challenge in front of them, which is that they're playing this instrument. It's a very unusual instrument, and the temptation is to let the novelty of the instrument carry you. But it's just a tool. It's just an instrument, and so what you really have to do is you really have to master it and really carry it. And so I think that stick players can be forgiving of their own um, lack of progress, if you will, in music uh, because they're doing something novel and unusual. And I would say I would should have studied music harder on the instrument itself, like really studied what music was doing with the instrument itself, as opposed to relying on its novelty and capability. That's what I would.
I think that's Yeah, I think that's good advice for musicians all over as well. Well, Greg, thank you very much for your time, for your wisdom. Hopefully, we will see you at one of our Catalyst retreats.
It's been a real pleasure, Riley. Nice to meet you, and thanks. Again, I'm sorry for the shit juggling around of the schedule and stuff, but it seemed to work out okay.
Yeah, not a problem.